Coulter Thorne rode out before sunrise, the way men do when they own more land than they can see in a day. The frost still clung to the sagebrush, turning the whole valley into a shimmering silver plain. His stallion's breath rose in steady clouds, warm against the cutting December air. Coulter wasn't a man given to wandering thoughts. His life ran on straight lines, ledgers, grazing rotations, water rights, timber yields. He'd worked the numbers of the Thorne Ranch until it became the strongest spread in the Northern Territory. Folks in town called him lucky. Men who rode with him knew luck had nothing to do with it. The land respected discipline, and so did he. This morning's ride was nothing unusual. Every winter, right after the first hard freeze, he inspected the far reaches of his property, checking for washed-out gullies, broken fence rails, signs of trespassers, or tracks that shouldn't be there. A ranch this size didn't run on hope. It ran on vigilance. Coulter guided his horse along the ridge trail, overlooking the cottonwood draw. The sky was the pale blue of a cold flame, quiet and sharp. Below him, the land rolled out in long, empty swells. Good grazing country come spring, but barren and silent now. He paused when he reached the old timber cabin. Most folks didn't even know it existed. It was tucked in a fold of the land, hidden behind a tangle of juniper and wind-carved stone. The cabin had been built decades ago by a trapper who eventually moved on, or died, no one knew which. Since then, it had been left to the weather, roof sagging, porch half collapsed, door barely hanging on its hinges. Coulter had always meant to tear it down. Another thing on a list too long to conquer, but today something stopped him. Smoke. A thin, unwavering column rising from the stone chimney, straight, clean, confident. Not the drifting kind made by kids or vagrants. Someone who knew how to bank a fire was living inside that abandoned shack. Coulter narrowed his eyes. This was his land. No one lived on Thorne property without permission. He nudged his horse forward, moving slow and silent. The closer he rode, the more he noticed. Fresh wood stacked by the door, a patched window, a new latch carved onto the frame. Someone had been working hard. He dismounted quietly, boots crunching over frost. He wasn't angry, not yet, mostly curious. Most trespassers hid because they were up to something. But whoever lived here wasn't hiding at all. The place had been tended with care, not desperation. Coulter approached the door, raising a hand to knock. He didn't get the chance. The door opened on its own. A woman stood there, steady, unflinching, not startled in the least. She held a lantern in one hand, a piece of firewood tucked under her arm like she'd simply paused mid-chore. Her eyes met his with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't shame, wasn't apology. Just level-headed readiness. "Morning," she said, voice calm as cold creek water. "Didn't expect company?" Coulter Thorne straightened, studying her with the cool precision he reserved for new contracts and boundary disputes. "I reckon you didn't," he replied, "but this here's Thorne land, and I aim to know who's living on it." She didn't blink. "My name's Lydia Harrowell," she said, "and I'm not here to cause trouble." Coulter felt something unfamiliar flicker through him, interest nothing more, but sharper than expected. Because, trouble or not, Lydia Harrowell was a mystery, and mysteries had no business on his land. Coulter Thorne had met a good many people across the frontier, ranchers, gamblers, drifters, men running from debts, women running from worse. But Lydia Harrowell carried herself like none of them. She didn't shrink back from his authority, nor flare with the defensiveness most trespassers showed when cornered. Her posture held a quiet steadiness, the kind a person earned from years of standing on their own, even when the world refused to stand with them. She stepped aside from the doorway. "Since you're here," she said, "you might as well come in out of the cold." Coulter hesitated. Not out of politeness. He simply expected fear, bargaining, excuses. Not an invitation spoken with the matter-of-fact tone someone might use to offer a neighbor a cup of flour. Still, the air bit sharper than usual, and her calm unnerved him just enough to make curiosity outweigh caution. He stepped inside. The cabin surprised him. It was still rough, yes, walls weathered gray, gaps stuffed with moss and cloth, floors creaking under the slightest weight, but someone had turned it from a collapsing relic into a place that breathed. A woven rug lay near the hearth, handmade and worn thin at the center. A wooden table stood under the patched window, its legs propped by stacked rocks to make it sit level. A line of herbs hung drying from the low rafters. Everything was clean. Everything had purpose. Coulter's gaze swept the room the way he assessed a new parcel of land, with precision, not judgment. "You fixed the roof," he said. Lydia nodded. "Best I could. Winter's rough on leaky places." "You hauled all that timber yourself?" "I don't see anyone else around to do it." There was no sarcasm in her voice, only fact. Coulter respected fact. He removed his gloves, holding them in one hand. "You understand this cabin's on my property?" "I do." Lydia set the lantern on the table. "I wasn't hiding that, just using what was empty." Coulter leaned slightly against the doorframe. "Most folks ask before settling on someone's land. Most folks don't have anywhere else to go." Not said with pain, said with practicality. And that, more than anything, caught him off guard. People who had nothing often carried their emptiness like a wound. Lydia carried hers like a tool, something to work with, not drown in. He studied her more openly now. Her hair was the dark, heavy kind that caught firelight and held it tight. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms marked with the faint scratches of woodwork. She wasn't frail. She wasn't hardened either. She was steady. And steadiness was rare in a land where people blew around like loose tumbleweed, looking for someone else to blame for their troubles. Coulter cleared his throat. "How long you planning on staying?" "Long enough to get back on my feet," she answered. "I don't want charity, Mr. Thorne, just time. You know my name. Everyone in Ash Hollow knows your name." "Fair enough." His reputation traveled faster than most riders. "And what brought you here?" he asked. She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she picked up a kettle, poured water into a tin cup, and placed it on the edge of the hearth to warm. Only when she settled the kettle back onto its hook did she speak. "I needed somewhere no one would look for me," she said. "Not because I'm hiding from the law. I'm hiding from the kind of trouble the law doesn't bother with." Coulter's eyebrow lifted. "That's so. That's all I'll say for now." He respected that. People told truth in layers. Forcing the next one never worked. He straightened from the doorframe, slipping his gloves back on. "I'll be plain with you, Miss Harrowell. This is my land. You living here puts me in a position I have to address." She nodded once, firm. "Tell me what you want, and I'll abide by it." Most trespassers begged. Some lied. A few ran. Not Lydia Harrowell. She asked for expectations like they were chores on a list she fully intended to complete. Coulter exhaled slowly. The cold air outside seeped through the cabin walls, raising a faint mist from his breath. "I'll think on it," he said. Lydia's eyes softened, not warmly, but with the respect of someone who understood fairness when she saw it. "That's all anyone can ask." Coulter stepped back outside. His boots sank into frost, the cold bright and unforgiving. He mounted his horse but didn't turn away immediately. Something about her, her composure, her capability, her straight-backed steadiness, pulled at a part of him he didn't often use, the part that recognized a person worth knowing, not saving. As he rode back toward the ridge, he knew one thing. Lydia Harrowell hadn't just taken shelter in an old cabin. She'd taken root. And Coulter Thorne had no intention of ignoring that. Coulter Thorne didn't sleep much that night, not because of worry or anger, those were emotions that seldom troubled him, but because Lydia Harrowell presented a situation he'd never encountered before. She wasn't a squatter trying to steal land. She wasn't some broken soul hiding from the world. She wasn't helpless, reckless, or deceitful. She was capable, and capability deserved a fair answer. By dawn, he had already saddled his horse and written out a rough draft of an agreement on a single sheet of ledger paper. Business came easier than breathing for Coulter, and he treated this no differently than negotiating grazing access with a neighboring rancher. When he arrived at the cabin again, Lydia was already splitting wood. Each swing of her axe was clean and decisive. No wasted motion, no performance, just necessity. She paused only when she noticed him at the edge of the clearing. "You came back." A statement, not a question. Coulter dismounted, tying his reins loosely around a dead stump. "I said I'd think on things. Thinking's done." Lydia set the axe aside, wiping her palms against her skirt. She didn't look nervous, didn't brace herself. She simply waited. Coulter pulled the folded paper from his coat. "I'm not in the habit of allowing folks to live free on my land," he began. "I understand. But I also don't throw out people who aren't causing trouble." Her chin dipped in acknowledgement. "So here's my answer," Coulter continued, unfolding the paper. "A contract. Simple terms." Lydia stepped closer, not crowding him, just near enough to hear. "You may stay in this cabin through winter," Coulter said, "provided you help with tasks this ranch needs done." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not at the offer, but at the fairness. "What kind of tasks?" "Fence line surveys, water source checks, any place too remote or time-consuming for my regular crew during winter. You've already shown you can repair, build, and think things through. That's useful." Lydia let the information settle, piece by piece. "And in exchange?" she asked. "You get shelter," Coulter replied. "And the agreement keeps you on the right side of the law. If anyone questions why you're here, they'll see you're employed by me for a defined purpose. My signature will hold." The faintest breath left her. Not relief exactly, but release. A person who had been bracing for expectation finally given clarity. "May I see the paper?" she asked. Coulter handed it over. Lydia studied it carefully, not skimming, not pretending. She read every line, twice. "You wrote this yourself?" she murmured. "I did." "You're a very precise man, Mr. Thorne." "Precision keeps a ranch standing." She handed it back. "One correction." Coulter blinked. Most people didn't correct him, ever. "What is it?" "Add a clause that ends the agreement after winter without obligation on either side." Coulter considered her request. "You planning to leave?" "I'm planning to have choices," she answered plainly. He respected that more than anything she'd said yet. Coulter retrieved a pencil from his coat, bracing the paper against his saddle, and added the clause in clean, sharp lettering. Lydia watched, arms folded, not stern, but measured. When he finished, she read it again. "This is fair," she said softly. "It's meant to be." Then Lydia surprised him, not by accepting, but by reaching for his pencil. "May I sign?" she asked. "Go ahead." She wrote her name in handwriting that was neat, steady, and confident. Lydia Marion Harrowell Coulter added his own beneath hers, his signature bold and unmistakable. "That settles it," he said. "You're here with my permission now. Winter contract worker." Lydia folded the agreement carefully and handed it back to him. "You keep that," she said. "I'll honor what I signed." Coulter tucked it inside his coat. "I know you will." A small silence passed between them. Not emotional, just the quiet understanding of two people who respected efficiency and order. Lydia gestured toward the forested ridge. "Where do you want me to start?" "Fence line east of the creek," Coulter replied. "Mark what's damaged. I'll check your notes at week's end." "Understood." As she picked up her coat and gloves, heading toward the task without hesitation, Coulter watched her go. Not with curiosity, not with concern, but with something rare, professional confidence. Lydia Harrowell was no trespasser now. She was part of the Thorne operation, and he had a feeling the ranch would be better for it. The town of Ash Hollow didn't come alive often, but once a year it shook itself awake for Founders' Day, the one occasion when ranchers, merchants, miners, and families all gathered in the dusty main street to celebrate the town's stubborn survival. December winds cut through the air, but no one seemed to mind. Banners hung from porch railings. Children ran in clusters, their boots kicking up frozen dust, the scent of roasted chestnuts mixed with wood smoke, and the tang of horse sweat. Coulter Thorne arrived just after noon, as expected. Wealthy men didn't get the privilege of staying home. He was on half the committees, had funded a third of the schoolhouse repairs, and his cattle fed most of the county. When Coulter Thorne walked into an event, people noticed, even if they pretended not to. He tied his stallion outside the mercantile and stepped into the street. Folks greeted him with nods and polite hellos. Some tipped hats. Others angled themselves near him, hoping to start a conversation that might turn into a favor later. Coulter returned gestures with the exact measure required, just enough to maintain respect, never enough to invite needless talk. Today, his mind wasn't on Lydia Harrowell or the cabin. Today was about doing what a man of his standing must, showing his face, keeping peace, and reminding the town he wasn't just rich, he was reliable. A group of ranch owners waited near the racetrack, discussing grazing rights in the early freeze. "Coulter!" called Merrill Cook, a man with a thick beard and thicker pride. "Tell these boys the creek boundary never shifted. They're claiming my cattle crossed onto their side." Coulter glanced at the group. Land disputes were nothing new. Founders' Day always loosened tongues and tightened tempers. "Creek's been in the same place since before I was born," he said. "If cattle crossed it, they walked." The men grumbled, half satisfied, half irritated. Coulter let them argue without him. He wasn't here to mediate. Not today. A brass band tuned their instruments near the saloon, children darting between barrels and benches. Coulter moved past them toward the vendors' stalls lining the street. He greeted the blacksmith, checked in with the general store clerk, and exchanged brief remarks with the schoolmistress, who seemed intent on convincing him to donate more winter supplies. Nothing unusual, nothing pressing. It was the kind of day that reminded him how predictable people could be, until a conversation drifting from behind a tent caught his attention. Two men spoke in low tones, not low enough. "I'm telling you, Crozier's buying up claims again," one hissed. "Land he ain't got no right to. Saw him with forged paperwork last month." Coulter's steps slowed. Crozier. The name meant something, not personally, but in the way that names tied to trouble always did. An itinerant land broker with a habit of pressing desperate folks into selling what they didn't understand. Crozier had left this region years back, or so everyone believed. The second man spat. "He'll get himself strung up one day, pushing folk off property that ain't his to touch. You hear about that widow near Blue Ridge? Papers said she forfeited her land, but she swears she never signed a thing." Coulter's jaw tensed. Forgery, stolen land, names altered on ledgers. He didn't move closer, didn't need to. He had heard enough. Crozier's type didn't prey on the strong. They preyed on those without connections or protection. People who lived quietly, out of sight. People like Lydia Harrowell. Coulter stepped aside as a group of children ran past, shouting excitedly about the pie-eating contest. He forced his breathing even, steady. He hadn't come here to get entangled in gossip or speculation, but this wasn't gossip. This was a pattern, a land broker resurfacing, stories of forged signatures, a widow stripped of her rights, names erased or altered. If Crozier was working this region again, then Lydia's presence in that abandoned cabin wasn't chance. A bell rang near the stage, signaling the start of the mayor's speech. People gathered, clapping and cheering. Coulter offered the mayor a polite nod when their eyes met, but his attention was elsewhere now, deep in thought, assembling pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed until today. He stayed at the event out of obligation, shook hands out of courtesy, and offered measured smiles the way wealthy men must, but his mind wasn't with the town. It was already back at that cabin in the draw, and the woman inside it who had said she needed somewhere no one would look. Coulter Thorne didn't ride straight to the cabin after Founders' Day. He forced himself to wait until the next morning, because decisions made in the heat of new information were seldom good ones. A night's rest, a cup of coffee, a morning ride, those tempered, impulsive instincts. But they didn't change the fact that Crozier's name had sunk into his thoughts like a buried splinter. When he reached the old cabin, Lydia Harrowell was outside stacking cut firewood with the same steady rhythm she applied to every task. She glanced up when she heard his horse, then continued her work without fluster. "You're early today," she said. "I haven't even fixed the stove yet." "This isn't a work visit," Coulter replied, dismounting. She paused, one log balanced against her hip. "That's so." Coulter took a slow breath. It wasn't his habit to pry. It wasn't his right either. But something heavy hung between them, something that needed naming. "I was in town yesterday," he said. "Heard something that may concern you." Lydia set the log down and dusted off her hands. Her expression didn't tighten, didn't flinch, yet something in her eyes shifted. Not fear, not guilt, recognition. "What did you hear?" she asked. Name was Crozier. For a beat, the winter air itself seemed to still. Lydia's fingers closed around the edge of the woodpile, subtly, like someone bracing for an expected blow. Coulter watched carefully. You know him. Everyone who's ever lost more than they should knows someone like him, she answered quietly. Tell me what happened. He didn't demand it. He simply offered the space for truth to stand if she chose to place it there. Lydia exhaled slowly, the breath rising in a pale mist. When my husband passed, 2 winters ago, he left me a small plot of land near Blue Ridge. Nothing grand. Enough to plant, enough to build on. I tried to make it work. Worked harder than anyone thought wise. Her tone wasn't sorrowful. It was measured, like recounting the steps of a map. Then Crozier showed up, she continued. Said he was helping settle disputed claims. Said my husband had left debts I never saw proof of. He asked for signatures. I refused. Something in his manner wasn't right. Coulter nodded once. Crozier rarely showed his full hand at first. But one morning, I went to check on the boundary markers and a group of men were tearing down my fence. They held documents, signed documents, saying I'd forfeited the land. You didn't sign anything, Coulter said. No. A simple word, flat as stone. And you couldn't fight it? Lydia gave a half smile, humorless. Fight with what? Lawyers cost money I didn't have. The sheriff said the papers looked legitimate. Neighbors didn't want it. Get involved. Folks see a widow alone and assume she's mistaken. Or lying. Coulter's jaw worked silently. He hated injustice more than conflict. Conflict could be settled with rules. Injustice festered. What brought you here? He asked. She shrugged, folding her arms against the cold. I didn't want a fight I couldn't win, so I left. Walked north until my feet blistered. When I found this cabin, it was broken, but it was empty. And empty places can't betray you. This time, her voice dipped, not into grief, but into reality. For Lydia Harrowell, logic had always been her shield. Coulter glanced at the patched roof, the stacked wood, the repaired hinge. She had rebuilt this place with her own hands, survived with no bitterness, no theatrics, no complaint. Do you have proof he forged your signature? Coulter asked. Only my word, and words don't weigh much against stamped papers. They do when I say they do, he replied. Lydia blinked just once. But why would you get involved? Because you're working under my name now, Coulter said plainly, and Crozier has a habit of turning molehills into mountains if no one stops him. And you think you can stop him? Coulter's expression didn't shift. I know I can. Lydia's throat moved in a quiet swallow, not of emotion, but of calculation. She wasn't a woman who trusted easily, nor one who mistook kindness for rescue. What do you need from me? She asked. Everything that happened, Coulter replied. Dates, names, any detail you remember. I'll take it from there. Lydia nodded slowly. All right, she said. I'll tell you everything I know. And for the first time, not as a trespasser, not as a laborer, but as someone who finally had a man of influence standing on her side. Coulter Thorne didn't act quickly. He acted correctly, and correctness took preparation. Before dawn the next morning, he saddled his horse and rode toward Ash Hollow with Lydia's account memorized. He carried 2 things, the folded contract she had signed and a small notebook he used for land dealings. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just facts, dates, observations, the kind of things that defeated men like Crozier. Ash Hollow looked different on business mornings. Storefronts sat quiet. Snow sifted down in lazy flakes, gathering along windowsills. Only a few miners and ranch hands moved about, stamping boot tracks into the frosted ground. Coulter rode straight to the land recorder's office. Inside, the air was dry and warm, scented with old ink and aging paper. Samuel Darrington, the recorder, sat behind a counter piled high with maps and bound ledgers. A cautious man with sharp eyes, Samuel handled documents the way priests handled scripture. Coulter, he said, adjusting his spectacles, what brings you in this early? Need access to last year's property transfers around Blue Ridge. Samuel's eyebrows rose. Bit outside your range, isn't it? You buying more land? Not today. Samuel hesitated only briefly before retrieving the thick ledger. Men rarely denied Coulter anything. Not out of fear, out of respect. Coulter flipped through the pages with the practiced ease of someone who'd read more contracts than storybooks in his life. He found the transfer Lydia described. There it was, a forfeiture deed, signed by Lydia Marion Harrowell in an unfamiliar scrawl. Not her handwriting, not her signature, but official enough to pass a lazy sheriff or a pressured clerk. "Who filed this?" Coulter asked. Samuel leaned over the counter. "Looks like Crozier. Hired out to settle claims when Blue Ridge nearly collapsed after the drought." Coulter's jaw tightened. "Did anyone verify the signature?" Samuel gave a humorless laugh. "Verification? Coulter, you know how it is. Folks trust paperwork more than people." Coulter closed the ledger. "Is Crozier still in the region?" "He's in and out. Last I heard, he's staying behind the livery when he passes through town. Keeps his operations small, easier to move if trouble finds him." Trouble wouldn't find him. Coulter would. He found Crozier 2 hours later, standing near the livery stable, speaking with a pair of riders whose coats looked cleaner than their eyes. The man hadn't changed. Tall, narrow, built like a piece of rope that had been stretched too thin. His hat sat low, hiding a smirk Coulter had always distrusted. Crozier noticed him immediately and stiffened. "Well, if it ain't Coulter Thorne," he drawled, "what brings a man of your rank to the mud side of town?" Coulter dismounted without answering. His boots struck the ground with a weight Crozier couldn't pretend not to feel. "You filed a forfeiture deed under the name Lydia Marion Harrowell," Coulter said. "No threats, no anger, just truth delivered clean as a blade." Crozier's smirk faltered. "If I did, it was legal. Papers were signed. They were forged." Coulter pulled the recorder's copy from his coat. "And you're going to correct that? Today?" Crozier eyed the paper, then eyed Coulter. "You can't prove—" "You think I need proof?" Coulter stepped closer, slow, controlled. "What I have is influence, land, money, a name that holds weight in every county office from here to the territorial line. If I say the deed is fraudulent, nobody's keeping it alive. Not the sheriff, not a judge in this region, certainly not you." Crozier swallowed, his bravado thinning. Coulter continued, voice even. "You'll sign a statement voiding the deed, acknowledging fraud in filing. Then you'll leave this county and never make a claim in it again." "And if I don't?" Coulter didn't lift a hand, didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Then I will spend every dollar required to dismantle your entire operation, piece by piece, until there's nothing left for you to stand on." Sometimes power wasn't loud. Sometimes it was the quiet certainty of a man who meant exactly what he said. Crozier broke first. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll sign." "You'll do more than that," Coulter replied. "You'll have the correction registered today." Crozier nodded stiffly. He didn't look at Coulter again. He couldn't. When Coulter stepped back onto the street, the wind cut through his coat, carrying the faint sound of church bells from the far end of town. His breath steamed as he stood for a moment, letting the reality settle. Lydia Harrowell wasn't protected merely by truth now. She was protected by law, backed by a man the county didn't dare challenge. And he wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. 3 days passed before Lydia Harrowell saw Coulter Thorne again, not because he was avoiding her, but because he had things to build, sign, and set in order. Coulter didn't make promises, he made plans. And once a plan began turning in his mind, it rolled like a freight wagon on a downhill grade, steady, unstoppable, and exact. Lydia was sorting kindling behind the cabin when she heard the distant rumble of wagon wheels. She straightened, brushing wood dust from her palms as Coulter appeared through the stand of junipers, driving a fully loaded freight wagon pulled by a pair of bay draft horses. He stopped a few yards away. "You expecting company, Mr. Thorne?" she asked. "Not company," he said, setting the brake. "Delivery." Her brows lifted. "For what?" Coulter walked to the back of the wagon, untied the canvas covering, and pulled it aside. Fresh-cut lumber, new shingles, barrels of nails, a glazier's crate, a carpenter's toolkit, enough materials to build a home, not repair one. Lydia stared, stunned but silent. "This cabin was never meant to last another winter," Coulter said. "You could patch it for years, but it won't serve you well. You need something better." She folded her arms loosely, not defensive, simply cautious. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "A new cabin," Coulter replied plainly. "Built on higher ground, south-facing windows for winter light, a stone foundation so you don't fight drafts all season." Lydia didn't speak, waiting for the string attached. Coulter met her gaze steadily. I'm not giving it to you as charity, he said. I don't deal in handouts. I deal in agreements. All right, Lydia said slowly. What's the agreement? You'll continue the work outlined in your winter contract, Coulter said, but instead of a temporary arrangement, I'm making it long-term, a year at a time, renewed only if you choose. Her breath paused, not a gasp, just a measured, considering stillness. And what does the job pay? She asked. Coulter handed her a folded document. Monthly wages, he said. Enough for your expenses, food, clothing, supplies. Paid as a land consultant, clean, legitimate, no one questions it. Lydia opened the paper, scanning it with her same precise attention as the contract weeks before. The salary was generous, more than generous, but not outlandish enough to raise suspicion. You're serious? She murmured. I don't write anything I don't intend to keep. Lydia lowered the paper, her eyes steadier than ever. This is more than fair. It's meant to be. She stepped closer, boot crunching lightly over frost. Why help me this much? Because you've done every job I've given you faster and cleaner than my hired crew, Coulter said. Because you don't waste time or words. Because you've survived more than most folks without losing your sense. He gestured toward the lumber. And because a woman who rebuilds her life deserves a place built to last. Lydia let out a slow breath, one that seemed to warm the cold air around them. And the cabin? She asked. Construction starts tomorrow, he said. Crew's already hired. I chose the ridge above the meadow. Good drainage, good sun, no risk of flooding. Lydia looked away toward the place he described, her expression unreadable, but something in her posture softened, a long-held tension uncoiling, not in surrender, but in acceptance. You've thought of everything, she said. I try to, Coulter replied. Silence settled between them, not awkward, not weighty. Just the quiet acknowledgement of two lives shifting direction, not toward each other, but toward something steadier. Finally, Lydia nodded. All right, Mr. Thorne, I accept the job, and the cabin. Coulter extended his hand. Lydia shook it, firmly, confidently, an agreement sealed not with desperation, but with dignity. Welcome to the Thorne operation, he said. For the first time in a long while, Lydia answered. I'm glad to belong somewhere. As Coulter unloaded the first plank of wood, snowflakes drifted down, soft, bright, and gentle. Not a storm, not a burden, just a beginning.